Hi and welcome back to the next video. This is video number 14, and here we will just do something in NestJS. So we want to add like a message entity and a joined room entity, and also the accordingly logic. So both will have like many-to-one relationships to the user and the room. So because message belongs always to one room and to one user, but a room can have many messages and the user also. And so we are later able to filter everything like we need. For example, when we want to have like the last messages for a room, then we can do this. We also add like the services, the relationships, and so accordingly. And we also in our gateway implement the join room, leave room, and add message stuff. What I have to say here is maybe we have to refactor this in like one of the next videos, because it's like really hard to now think of what we need and to see if it really works. And to cut this into videos. So here we have like the structure for our video here. As always, we first have a look at our video outcome, then we read the user story for this, and then we implement the story and close it. So let's have a quick look to the outcome of this video here. So here's nothing much to show because we're just doing some backend stuff, but we have now two new tables, our joined room entity here, which has like a primary ID, a primary key. We have like our socket ID, we have like a many-to-one relationship to a user and also to the rooms, so that we always, if a user joins a specific chat room with a socket ID, we save this here, and if he leaves, we also remove it, so that we then, for example, if someone adds a new message to this chat room, then we can notify all the users that are online. Then we also have like a new message entity that has like also a primary key, the ID, the text, the actual message. Then we have timestamps for created ad and updated ad, so that we can sort this later for the latest message, for example, for a chat room and so on. Then we have it also connected with many-to-one to the users. So because one user can have many messages, but one message always belongs to one user, and the same goes to the rooms. So message always belongs to a room, and a room can have many messages. So this is done, and we also have added in our gateway new stuff like for joining and leaving a chat room, and also to add a message. That what we will have a look at if it works in the next video when we implement this stuff in Angular. So let's have here a look at our next video story. Here we are in video 14, and we want now to do some NestJS stuff. So we want to add message and join room entities. And we want to add logic to our gateway to join and leave a room, and to also be able to add a message, so that we can then later use this in our Angular application. For example, we can then use there the lifecycle events like ng on init, or ng on destroy and so on, or ng on changes, to use these events here. So our story is simple, but this gets like a huge video, I think, and you also here have to be aware that this is here much simplified in the story, and here maybe we have to adjust this in some of the next videos. So the story is, as a developer, I want that the user is able to join and leave one of his chat rooms. So as you remember, in our dashboard we have on the left side all the rooms of a user, and then if you click on it, then you have it on the right displayed, so he should be able to join and leave one of these chat rooms. He should also be able to add like a message to this chat room. And for this, we also need a message entity and a joined room entity to our API that we want to add here. And we want to add some logic to our gateway. So our acceptance criteria is we want to have a new message entity with a many-to-one relationship to user and also to room. So each user can have many messages, and each room can also have many messages. Then we want to have like a joined room entity where we can just track, like with a connected user entity before, which user is at the moment connected to this room, so that then we can send, when someone else in this room adds a message, that we can emit like an event to send this to this specific socket ID of this user. So we need there also a many-to-one relationship to user and to room. And we want in our gateway to add some like events for add message, for adding a message to a room, to join a room, to leave a room, and we want to update some existing stuff. So let's go to our API folder, and you see I already started up, so the application is running at the moment. So we could go to localhost and we could log in. And as always, remember that I sometimes here just reset like all the database and so on. So don't worry about this. You have to do this maybe also, because this is like a lot of in here. But I do. So now we have here, for example, one room. Then we just at the moment display here this JSON, and now we have stored this data in our database. So when we go to our localhost 5050, and then we log in. So this is our PG admin tool, so for Postgres, and with this we can access our database. And we can see what we saved here. So we can go to our databases and we can see that we have here all our 4 tables. And for example, when we query this table here, select all from connected user entity, then we can see that now my user here with user ID 1, the Thomas here, is at the moment connected. We have the socket ID so that we could send him a message that here are some new rooms and so on. And so this is done via the chat gateway. So we handle on gateway connection and on gateway disconnect. So here in our handle connection, we save this in our connected user service with the socket ID of the user and the user. And on disconnect, we remove this. So for example, if I close this here, and then I query again, you see now this is gone. And so, for example, when we create a room, when we look when we get, for example, all the users of this room, and then we look in our service, our connected user service, if the user is at the moment connected, if yes, then we emit like a new rooms event to him, so that then his list of rooms on the left side on the dashboard gets updated automatically, so in real time. So now we want to add like some entities to our application. So let's close this so that we don't have this much logging here. So let's say docker compose up. And now we can just stop it, because when we are developing, then we will just have errors all the time. So now we are here in our chat module, and now we can maybe make first some folders. So we have here our connected user, and then we can move the entity and the interface into it. Then we have our room. And now we also want to make our joined room. So let's call it joined room. And there we want to have all the users listed that joined a room. So we can make here like a new entity. So we say, for example, joined room.entity.ts. Maybe I will rename this later in some videos. I have to think about this a bit. So we can just say joined room entity. And we annotate it with add entity from type ORM, so that persisted. And then we can say we have, of course, an ID, which is a number, and it is a primary generated column. Then the same as in our connected user, we have our socket ID, which is a string. So this comes directly from socket.io then, because there every connection has like a unique ID. And then we have our user, so our user entity. And here we want to have like a many to one mapping. So we have here our user entity. And then we can say, for example, we name it later joined rooms. And we say add joined column. And then we also want to have like the room that we joined, or that the user joined with this connection. And so this is like also many to one. And then we can say this is room.joinedUsers. And we can say this is like a simple join column also. And then we can make an interface for this. So we say joinedroom.interface.ts. And we say export interface, joined room interface. And then we say ID is optional, which is a number. We have our socket ID, which is a string. We have our user, which is a user interface. And we have our room, which is a room interface. So we can now add this to our user. So let's go to our user entity. So in our user entity, let's close the other files. So in our joined room entity, we want to go to the joined rooms from our user. So we can say here joined rooms, which is of joined room entity. This is an array because the user can join many rooms. And here we have like a one-to-many mapping. So the joined room entity, then we can say, for example, joined room, and this is joined room dot room. And then this here should also be fixed. And then we can do the same for the room entity. So this is like a joined room entity array. And here we also have a one-to-many mapping. And we map this to the room. And then the second entity that we need here is like our message entity. Because one room, for example, can have many messages. And messages always belonging to one room, and the same goes for the user. So every user can have many messages, but one message always belongs to one user. So we can say message, and then we make a new file, message.entity.ts. And then we can simply say export class message entity. And we annotate it again with @entity from type ORM. And then we have, like always, our ID, which is a primary generated column. Then we have like our text, which is basically the message that someone sends into this room. Then we have like a relationship to the user. And this is that one that we always have to store like the user to the message, so that we can, for example, later display in our front end if I wrote the message or someone else. So for example, like in WhatsApp, you can always see who wrote a message. So we need to save this also here. So we can say the user entity, and this is our user dot messages. So we have to create this then. So in our user entity, we will now have also our messages, which is our message entity and an array. And here we also have a one-to-many mapping, message entity, and this goes to the user. So why is it not? Yeah, so it must be plural because we have many. So then this also gets like a @join column. And then we also have a room entity. So this is also many to one, because one room can have many messages, but one message must always belong to one room. So this also gets a @join table. Now we add this to our room. So here we have also our messages array. So this is like our message entity array. And this also has a one-to-many mapping. And this is our message entity. So this goes to message dot room. So then in our message, we also want to save like the time when it was created and when it was, for example, updated. If we will do this later, I at the moment don't think so, because this will then get too huge, the project. Maybe we can make this in a follow-up or something like this. And so we make this here like the same that we made it in the user or in the room, I think. So that this gets updated and created on default. So now we also need for message like an interface. So we can say message.interface.ts, and we simply say export interface message interface. And then we have our optional ID. We have our text, which is a string. We have our user, which is a user interface. We have our room, which is a room interface. And we have our created @timestamps and our updated @timestamps. So we can save this. And then we can quickly check our room entity. We have our joined users and we have our messages. So our relation seems to be good. So let's have a quick look at our user entity. So we have here our connection. So when we enable or when we connect first to our gateway, then this gets set so that we can there push the rooms. We have our joined rooms, so where we are online. And we have our message entity. So all our messages, so that we could also later display like all messages where the user sent. Actually, I'm not quite sure if we will need this stuff here, but it's good to have at the moment. So then we need to, now we have all our models here. We have to make sure that also all the imports, because I created here new folders, get updated. So let's have a quick look through all the files. And here we can remove the many to many. This is a false import. And then we can have a look here in our chat gateway. Yeah, so you see here the room interface import is wrong and the connected interface also. So let's re-import it. And then save it. And let's have a quick look if we have also here an issue. but this seems good. And now we also have to add our entities to our type ORM feature module. So we have here our room entity, we have our connected user entity, we have also our message entity, and we also have our joined room entity. So let's format it a bit so that it gets easier to read. And now we need to add some services so that we can later interact from our gateway with our database, for example. So here we at the moment have our connected user service and our room service. So now we can, for example, create our joined room service. So let's cd into our API folder and say nest generate service. And then we can say we want to go in our chat module. We want to go into our service folder, and then we want to create like the joined room service. And then you can see we have it here, and this automatically gets imported into our module. So then in our joined room service, we first need to inject our repository. So we have to add our constructor here. And then we say inject repository with the joined room entity. And then we make it private read only joined room repository. And this is from type repository for the joined room entity. And then we can do here our basic stuff. So that we want to create something. We want to find by user. We want to maybe find it by a room. So for example, here the joined room service, when a user joins a room and then adds a message, when we want and then we get this into our gateway, and then we add this message to the room. Then we want to find all the users that are currently connected to this room so that we can then send or emit like the message to them. So we need the find by room. Then we can also say delete by socket ID. So for example, on disconnect and so on, that we then delete the entry in our database. And we also want to have like a delete all that we can call when we want to remove all the users, for example, on startup from this table, because we don't want to have like old stuff in our database. So we can say, for example, here this.joined room repository, and the easiest thing is to use the query builder. And then we simply say .delete and .execute. And then this should remove all entries from this table. For the delete by socket ID, we can say return this.joined room repository .delete, and then we can simply say socket ID. Of course, we first need to have it here as a parameter. Then in our find by room, we want to have our room, and then we want to return like a promise. Promise. And this is like our joined room interface array. And we can simply say return this.joined user joined room repository .find, and then we give him the room. So this is easy because it's like the same name here. for the parameter than for our property. Then we want to find by user. So this is basically the same code as beneath. And here we also want to return a promise with joined room interface array. So we say return this .joined room repository .find, and we go by user. And when we want to create it, so we want to create a joined user, which is a joined room, of course, joined room user, whatever. And then we want to return like a promise from joined room interface. And here we can just say return this .joined room repository .save. And then we use our joined room user. And we rename this to joined room. So now we should have like a service here that we can use in our gateway to do all the stuff that we need. And we also can create like a message service. So we say nest generate service, then we go in our service folder, and then we can just name this message. And here we can, for example, then create a message, find all the messages. But this is probably something that we have to do in the next videos, because otherwise this gets too long. So let's just add like basic stuff. So here we also inject our repository. So we say add inject repository for the message entity. And then we make it private read-only message repository from type repository message entity. And then we say async create and here we want to create a message which is from message interface, and we return like a promise also from message interface, and then we simply say return this .message repository.save, and we can, for example, say here also this dot create so that the annotations work. And then we can say async find messages for room. So just if we are already doing it, we can try how it should work. So we want to find by room, and we want to specify pagination options. And then we get in return like a promise, which is pagination. And then we have our message interface. So we want to return the paginate from our NestJS paginate package with a message repository, our pagination options. And then we want to find by a room, and we will also want also to return the user and the room relation. Made anything wrong? User room user room room relation. I think it must be relations, yes. So that we then return this with the relations, but we have to check later if this actually really works. So now we have done our services. So the basic stuff, but we probably have to here add like a bit of stuff later in the next videos. And for example, I think to our room service, we also want to get like a room, so we can make an async function, get room, and we need the room ID, which is a number, and we return a promise for room interface, and then we say just return this dot room repository dot find one, and we say we want to find by room ID, and we specify some options, the relation with users, so that we then for our room entity have our we have to re-import it. So in our room, where are we, room entity, we have our users that are there. So now we can, I think, go to our gateway. And let's have a quick look. So we have to, this file is getting a bit large, so we later have to think about how we can split this up probably. So one of the first things, when we emit module, then we delete all from our connected user service because we don't want to have all data. And what we can also add here is we want to also remove everything from our joined room service. So we have to use these here also in our constructor. So we say joined room service is our joined room service, and then we have our also our message service, which is our message service, and then we can use them here. And here we also want to delete all, so all the old records when we restart the application, for example. So then we can look, for example, we have here our create room, and before we have to adjust this here also. So we have to subtract page -1 to match the Angular material paginator, because otherwise in material we have like page first is like 0 and here it's like 1, so we have to subtract it again, so like we did before in the last videos, but I think here I forgot it. So this is rooms.meta.current page -1, and then we have to add like some new stuff here. So we have our paginate rooms, and we always have to add, when we have like an incoming page request from Angular, we have to modify our page here, and we have to check that the limit is not above 100. So we could not do this, but it's better. And here we have to adjust the page, because in Angular, like first page is 0 and here first page is 1, so we always have to adjust this. So we could handle this like in an own function. So we can say handle incoming page request, and then we want to take here our page interface, and then we can say we want to do exactly the stuff that we are doing here, and we remove it from here and move it to here, and then we just return the page. And then here we can simplify this, so we say this user.handle incoming page request, and we get him the page, and then this handles here like the check. And we can see, are we doing this here somewhere again? At the moment not. So let's remove here the empty stuff. So now we have our paginate rooms. And now we can make our join room. So we say subscribe message to join room. And then we can say async on join room. We have our socket and we have our room that we are joining. And then, for example, we want first to have, we want to return all the messages to this user so that he can see all the messages. So we could say this dot message service dot find messages for room. And then we specify here the room. And then we want to always have like the pagination request. So the limit, we want to have the last 10 messages, for example. And so the first page, so we limit it to 10 and we want to have the first page. So then we get like, page number 1. And maybe we also have to, we have to check this later. Probably have to sort them here by the created date so that we have them in the right order, so that the last message that was sent to this room gets displayed at last to in this chat room. So then we want to save our connection to the database. So we say await this dot joined room service dot create, and then this wants a joined room from us. So we have here our socket ID, which is our socket dot ID. We have our user, which is our socket dot data dot user, and we have our room from here. So here we save connection to room. And then we want to also send all the messages for this room to the connected user. So we say send last messages from room to user. So we say simply await this dot server dot to, then to this specific socket ID, and we emit our messages event with the messages. And this is then our paginated messages object from our service. And so we have to say our messages dot meta dot current page. We have to subtract again, so we have to make -1, because here our pages are always like 1 bigger. So then we have like our join room, and now we also need our leave room. So we could say subscribe message leave room, and we can say async on leave room. We have our socket, and then we simply want to remove our connection from the joined room. So we want to remove connection from joined rooms. So we can simply say await this dot joined room service dot delete by socket ID, and we use here our socket ID. Then we could also specify like our add message so that we can later use it. So we say subscribe message, and we can say add message, and this should add like a message to our room. So we say async on add message, and we have here our socket and our message from message interface. And here we have our created message, which is a message interface, and we can say await this.messageService.create. Then we can pass in here the message that we got, and we also add like the user from our socket. So here we want to have like a message, and for the interface we have from our frontend we get the text, we get the room, and the user is what we will what we are adding here from our socket data, so that we save it correctly. Then we can, for example, get the room, and we say await this.roomService.get room, and here we can use our created message.room.id. Then we would have our room, and we could also get our joined users for this room, which is our joined room interface array, so that we can then loop over it. So we can say here await this.joinedRoomService.find by room, and we simply use the room that we got here before. Then we would have our joined users, and then we have maybe fly to do, and then we want to send new message to all joined users of the room currently online. Yeah, so I think this should be like all for this year. So we have to do this then specifically when we add the logic to our front end here for this, and then we have to think about it how we want to do it. So either we push like all the messages, or we make a second event like add message that the front end is listening to, and we just add this message at the bottom, or we send like the last messages, and so on. So we have to do this like in another video where we handle also the front end stuff. Here, let's make a quick look if we can start it correctly. So when we say docker compose up, if everything goes well, and then in the next video we will see if we can subscribe to all our events. And so for example, the leave room or join room event, we can, so you see we have here also some issues. Let's see if we imported everything here correctly. So this seems good. This seems also good. Then we have our joined room entity. Looks also good. This also. We have our message entity. Looks also good. We have our room entity. Also joined room message. Also work. Our interface. Then we have our connected user service. Okay, here is like issue because we changed like the folder structure a bit. So let's import it again correctly. Here all seems fine. In our message service probably also, because we just created it, and the room service could be like a mistake. No. So let's see if we have like we have our message, we have our joined room entity, so we have all our entities here specified. So let's try to start again. And let's see if it now starts up without an issue. So right now it seems better. So we have here cannot find module room.entity. So in our user entity we have to update this. So let's go to our user entity. Because we changed it, room entity. So now see if it works well. So our front end seems good, our back end also. So let's have maybe a quick look on localhost and also to our database. Here, or let's have a quick look if here we can still use everything like before. And then in our next video we want to have a quick look also when we implement the front end stuff that we can access all our messages here from our gateway, so that we can then check like the paginate rooms, the join room, the leave room, and the add message events. So let's commit our changes here, or first check against our user story. So let's have a quick look. So we have like a new message entity with many to one to user and also to room. We have a joined room entity with many to one to user and to rooms. And we have like a new add message, join room and leave room for our gateway. And we update like existing functions. And maybe we have to also refactor some stuff in the next videos. So we can say git add upper A, and we can commit with message, and we say video 14, and this was at message dot entity and joined room dot entity and at to gateway at message join room, leave room, and create services accordingly. And now we can git push everything.